Hello and welcome to another episode of our podcast series, Conversations with Sound Artists. I'm Glenn Kiser. I'm the director of the Dolby Institute. And in this particular series of conversations, we're focusing on collaboration between directors and their sound designer, sound supervisor. So I'm thrilled to be sitting at a table with Darren Aronofsky and Craig Henighan to talk about their collaboration. You guys have worked on 5 movies together. Obviously, Darren, I think one of the most daring and original filmmakers working in American cinema today. You guys started, your first movie that you worked on together was Requiem for a Dream.
Yeah.
So how did that relationship start? How did you guys meet each other, and how did that?
You probably have more memory than I do about that.
I probably do, yeah. Darren was shooting in New York, and the dailies were being done at Filmhouse up in Toronto, which is now Deluxe. And I think the story goes, what I recollect, is on Pi, it was Brian
Emmerich.
And yeah, Brian Emmerich, a great sound designer out of New York. But that was it, right? And Dominic obviously was a mixer, but there was not a whole crew. And I think what ended up happening was with Requiem.
I don't even know how we did Foley on Pi.
You might not have. Brian might have just cut a few things.
Maybe.
I
don't really remember.
Because that was probably like, a 3 or 4 or 5 day mix?
It was the Pi was like a week mix. Yeah, I remember. And it was back in the day when the mixer was allowed to smoke. So it was like, and Dom was a chain smoker. There were like little burns in the console of where the cigarettes burnt out. So it was a different time.
Yeah. I think when Requiem came along, because it was a bigger budget, I think somewhere in your camp, someone realized that they needed
Foley and help,
dialogue editing, like they needed a sound crew. And through the dailies, a lot of times in Toronto, the sound would get thrown in. Sure. If the lab deal was sort of done.
Oh, right.
So somehow there's not necessarily a payola thing, but there's like if you do your dailies with us,
your lab work,
we'll do a sound package for you. Here's some great mixers. Here's some talent. I was part of Sound Dogs up in Toronto at the time.
Right.
And the initial contact for Darren and Requiem was through Nelson Ferreira. Nelson was original Sound Dog, and it came through him. And I was just a sound designer working sort of as a co-op. That's what Sound Dog sort of is. And that was it. But I was hired initially just to cut backgrounds and doors and all the sort of regular stuff. Brian
and
Emmerich.
Environmental. I remember doing environmental stuff with you, like the thunderstorms. And
the storm. But it was a lot of it was sort of pitched to me as the regular stuff. And then Brian was going to do all the hip hop sequences and all the other kind of stuff. But I know our relationship took a step when I just took it upon myself a couple times to do a little bit more designer aspects. The main one I did was the shaking of, was it Jared and
when they're
Marlon
in the
jail.
Screens shaking.
And, and
it was interesting because we actually, we got the sound wave and actually shook the visuals to the sound, which was cool. We used the sound wave to control the shakes.
So for some reason, I always remember that one, and I remember Darren liking that. Yeah. And I think out of that was sort of the beginning of like, oh, maybe this guy is a little bit more than just cutting doors and sirens and guns and stuff like that.
But then at some point, because you guys ended up coming to Skywalker for the mix on Requiem.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so, and that's how I got involved because I ran Skywalker at the time. But I had been told Darren's got his sound guy, so you guys, it's only about.
We had already been cutting, we had already been the editorial crew for sure, and the idea was to mix it at Deluxe, but upper management at the last minute they did this whole shuck and jive thing with the certain mixers that Darren had vetted, and then those mixers were no longer, I don't know if they want to say employed or around, and then they tried to do this thing with these other mixers, and none of us wanted to.
What filmmaker doesn't dream, in our generation, to go to Skywalker, not knowing that you're off the grid for 5 weeks in the middle of nowhere as a 20
he still talks about it.
29-year-old. I mean, that was I loved Skywalker, and I loved working with the team there, but it was, you're like going to the middle of a desert, unfortunately.
It's look, I lived that for 11 years when I ran the company. And I watched a lot of different directors come through there, and some people just loved the isolation of it.
Yeah.
And for some people, it was like being in a sensory deprivation.
I would love the isolation now, but back then it was pre-internet and it was pre-cable. So there was like nothing on TV. There was not. So it was very, very. I mean, now it's not as big a deal because we're all connected.
Well, and also, but your style is different than a lot of directors in post-production specifically, because we'd work with a lot of directors who would come in like for 2 days a week and do playback and notes, and then they'd go back to LA. But
I live there. Yeah.
We pretty quickly figured out with you that we couldn't actually pre-dub on 2 stages at the same time because
I had to be present.
Because you had to be present during the pre-dubs.
Well, I the mix I think is a huge creative part of the film, and I'm always amazed when I hear that filmmakers aren't there. The directors aren't in the room often for a lot of it.
Yeah.
But I think back then I used to sit through the dialogue mix and
he still does. He still to this day. I mean,
not everything, but less, because I trust you guys. Now we know, like I know they know what I like, so they're pretty close. When I get in, I'm just sort of the same thing with Matty and the DI. Like,
sure,
I let him do his work, and then I come in and see a few other things, but.
Well,
we've been doing this long enough that that's the importance of having a team that you trust.
Right, but that first movie that you worked on, Requiem, I mean, the track is really adventurous, and there's a lot of great, really cool sound design stuff that was going on. So, it took a lot of finessing on the mixing stage.
Oh yeah, it was a lot of work, and I do remember that one time we were down for 18 hours. Do you remember that?
Was it a full 18 hours?
It was like some tech crash, like something crashed, and we almost moved to another stage. I remember so well. I remember I read, because I was in the. It's what's her name? Humphrey Bogart's.
The Lauren Bacall?
No, not Lauren Bacall. The other one who's an African queen.
The Katharine Hepburn.
Katharine Hepburn, and I read her biography while I was there. Autobiography.
So what Darren's talking about is at Skywalker Ranch, there's a little bed and breakfast where the filmmakers stay, and each George Lucas made each room is themed based on somebody that he admires in the film. So the Akira Kurosawa.
I didn't get the Kurosawa room. That would have been great.
Japanese decor. I'm sure that Kate Hepburn has some sort of like
New
England cottagey kind of.
Yeah. It was. It was sort of like a safari type of thing. But it was great.
So I want to talk about Mother.
Please.
Obviously, you were like, move along. So I was immediately struck by the sound design on the film, and the house is a character in the film. The house is obviously a rich metaphor.
Well, I think for me, I've always toyed with making a fully subjective movie. Pi was very much from Max Cohen's point of view, and I've always played with it. But I think this is the first time that I fully submitted to the rules of trying to make every single shot in it from Jennifer Lawrence's character's mother's point of view, except for the opening shot and the closing shot, which is from Javier's point of view on purpose. And that was I think that allowed us for the first time to really try and do a fully subjective sound design. The other, I think, significant thing that really influenced the film is when we decided to go without a score. What happened is I hired Johan Johansson to write a score, and we worked for 6 months together on a score, and so did Craig work with him as well, like he always does with the composer, collaborating with sounds. And Johan wrote some incredibly beautiful music, and we put it up and we did this test screening with it, just for in-house, and suddenly the film stopped working. And I realized it had nothing to do with the quality of the music. The music was beautiful, and the music was actually thematically and supportive of exactly what was going on the screen. But I realized music is actually an objective tool. It's a tool that a director uses to tell an audience how to feel. Let's get a little bit more scary now. Let's get a little bit more relieved, a little bit more happy. Whatever you want to do, you can do that with music. But the music wasn't coming out of Jennifer's character. It was coming out of, my mind. And we wanted to make the film purely from her point of view. So we realized that the music was tipping the emotion. It was basically the entire film, people are leaning into the movie to understand what Mother is experiencing. And if you pushed it, then it kind of lost its balance. And when that happened, it became a huge job for Craig, because it was suddenly like, well, I got no music. Now we really have to unleash everything we've always wanted to do. And I think this is the first time, that, and definitely the best example of any sound design I've done in my career, because it's a it basically carries the film. And it's funny, Ellen Burstyn came to a screening just the other night with someone who was I think a director. I don't remember her name. And afterwards they were talking, and she sent me an email about what they liked best. And she was like, yeah, my friend really loved the score. I didn't write that or anything, but basically, yeah.
Ruin that sort of, yeah.
But I think what the person meant was they liked the atmosphere and the sound design. But it almost becomes a score.
Right.
The creaks and the cracks.
So for the sound designer, that's like a great dream.
They don't
right?
come along every day.
A film that doesn't have music in it, but it's also kind of like a terrifying moment as well.
Yeah, I mean, there was like, well, Henighan, it's all on you. Go, and we did our best. And there were times where we actually, Darren and I always try to push, and a lot of times we'll go too far. And we'll live in that world for a little while, a week or a couple of weeks, and then eventually it gets back to sort of where it. Speaking of the music, sort of telling the audience how to feel. There was a few times where we were doing sound design that was telling the audience how to feel, and then we realized like that was.
You would maybe introduce some tonalities or rhythm in your sound design.
No rhythm.
Not so much rhythm, but tonalities and drony things. But
as long as it wasn't musical,
yeah.
It was interesting. As soon as you heard an instrument,
it became very obvious.
Because audiences it just stuck
pushed
out.
You out.
Because we tried. We tried to take Johann's
elements
of it, just like because he's incredible sounds that he makes with glass and all these weird people that play violins, incredible avant-garde type of stuff that were incredible sounds. But as soon as you recognized an instrument, it just stuck out. It was bizarre.
And it was no matter where we mixed it, how we mixed it.
And the first pass, we actually left some in. Yeah. We were like, all right, let's live with it. And then the next pass was like, all out.
That was all. Darren, out.
I was just like, it's not right. It's just, we can hear it. It was a different feeling.
The film as a whole, if you look at sound as part of the fabric of everything that you're working on, it stuck out. It didn't need it. It was a color that we didn't need in the film as a piece that added anything.
Well, so I'm kind of curious to kind of dig into this a little bit more because you also, Black Swan is also a very strong POV film, at least for me viewing it. And in that sense, she's in every scene of the film. It really is, and both movies, I feel like the sound design gets increasingly intense as the film goes through because you're sort of exploring what the break apart of that character's psychology is. But why does the music work in Black Swan, but it didn't work necessarily in Mother?
Well, I do think that it's not as subjective, that movie. There's wide shots with characters when she's with other characters and stuff. In Mother, there's never a wide shot when she's another character. In Mother, there's never does an actor cross between the camera and Jennifer.
It's really that's a rule.
It's the only place the camera could be was over her shoulder, looking at what she's looking at, on her face, and sometimes that was the same shot, continuous, and her POV. That's it. So it was basically 2 shots or 3 shots if you split up the over the shoulder and her close up for the entire film. And when she was alone, we allowed her to walk into wide shots because we felt that her and the house were one and connected. And that was it. But otherwise, the camera was always with her, which is leans into like why, it's hard to remember that when you're watching the film because there's basically 66 minutes of close-ups of Jennifer, yet she never bores the audience. She keeps it alive every moment.
Without having music to lean on.
Yeah, without having anything to lean on.
She's the score on a lot of levels.
She's
the rhythm. She's the pacing. She's the...
I think the ballet, Black Swan was about the music because it was basically a reinterpretation of Swan Lake. So there was never a way we could ever even have thought of it without music. I mean, it's dance, so you need music for dance.
Right, obviously, but I'm thinking about the score that's in Swan. That's in.
I mean, most of what Clint did in that, I would say, and he wasn't eligible for the Academy Award because
there was too much Tchaikovsky.
Yeah, it was mostly Tchaikovsky. I mean, I don't know percentage-wise, and then Clint would take elements of it and manipulate them, and then put them into a more repetitive nature that became more score-like. So there were long sequences that are all Clint, but everything was inspired and sort of pulled out of Tchaikovsky, and but a lot of it is the ballet because we wanted that. I mean, one of the big things I did in that, if you remember, is I went through the music of the ballet, and I actually would stop and write in order what scene each piece was on top of. So we had this map because I wanted the whole thing to be a reinterpretation of Swan Lake. So it's actually in order. I remember Matthew Bourne, the great choreographer, director from the UK, saying, "You didn't have to do it all in order." And I was like, "Thank you. You noticed." He was the only one who ever noticed it. And I was like, "The one guy who noticed that I didn't cheat." Yeah, was great.
That's the one guy you want to notice that.
But I don't know. It's just strange that music didn't click, and I think it made the film stronger. And for me, I was like,
absolutely.
I've never seen a horror film without music. And so that was, or a scary, or a tense, I don't necessarily call it a horror film, but a film that has tension as a major part of it, not having music is weird.
Yeah. Yeah. The distinctive way that you shot the film, how did that kind of echo through post-production? Because you were in post for a long time on this film.
It was a 53-week post. It was a crazy long post. Besides the complexity of the sound design, which, how many weeks were you on? You were probably on
50 odd.
50 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, it was a 26-week post originally, and then we kept going. And I was in New York for 4 months straight, and then we were out for a few times here and there even before that. So, I mean, it adds up.
It was a strange one. It was the film, because I had no coverage. Every moment had to work.
Well, I was about to say, how did you spend 50 weeks in post if you had no coverage when you shot?
Because there are more visual effects in Mother than there are in Noah.
Really?
Yeah, there's 1,200 shots in Mother.
But they're hidden.
Well, yeah. We were manipulating the frame and doing... I mean, some shots are 3 blended shots because, Moses, who was a great cameraman, just in that one take when Jennifer did something great, the camera was not quite in the right place. So we're able to, yes, we're playing with a 16 millimeter image, so the size of a postage stamp, but we were using every part of the image to get everything we could out of it. And I think once the music didn't work, I think sound was a lot of work because...
then you had to give Craig some additional time.
I think so. I mean,
we spent a lot more time together on this one than we did on Noah, for sure. And it kind of brought me back.
Than ever before.
Brought me, I guess.
It's a little weird to say, but in some ways, Noah, from a sound perspective, is more straightforward than Mother.
More straightforward I would say that. I think there's just more exploration in Mother. In terms of going deeper and figuring out the layers and how many layers we needed when. So
Darren had a lot of rules in photography about what he could and couldn't do. Did you have rules for the sound design?
We never really talk about rules specifically. I think there's, everything, and this started in Requiem. He likes repetition. This repetitive nature of sounds. Natural sounds are a big thing. Anything that ever gets too synthetic or too overworked, he tends to bounce out right away. So I don't even really present it to him unless I really feel strongly about it. There's not really rules in the grand scheme of it. It's like, certain panning rules come up, like how we pan something and when we pan something, the subjectivity of Jen and where we are in relation to her with the voices that are in another room, stuff like that, but never really talked about in those terms of like, we have to do it this way all the time. And that's probably because we've worked together for such a long time. Because I mix and design, and it's a constant evolution of things, and he's in quite a bit. By the time we get to sort of the final mix, per se, we've had all these dress rehearsals, so everything's really been vetted, and everything's been every single creak, every single footstep, every single breath. It's Darren's there every single.
And then it often becomes placement in the room.
Yeah.
Where we're talking about, we get into a lot of discussions because we love the 3-dimensionality that you can do in theatrical sound. And so we have a blast doing that. That's most of the fun at that point.
Definitely by that time. Once the sounds are working and he's happy with the sounds, it's.
But also the sound design reached even into the dialogue. I mean, that was a huge part of the film because in ADR, we were miking Jen's heart, miking her breath, miking different ways she said things, because of the huge crowd scenes in the Fever Dream, the last third of the film, we had major ADR groups, like over and over again, doing the craziest of things. And then they had to, it just wasn't dialogue cutting. Then it had to be treated and created and synthesized.
It becomes like a sound.
Basically.
And it was more like sound design.
Stuff that would normally come to me. Like, I think on the final mix, I think Skip literally just took the production dialogue and the principal ADR. Everything else was on my side of the desk. That
Which is all extra.
And then any musical elements, if we did play with musical elements, all came through my side as well. And then we would decide that we're going to use them anyways. But all that sort of stuff was vetted through my side of the
And none of the crowds were canned. Everything was created live and specific by ADR groups.
Did you participate in the group ADR sessions?
I ran them because I did.
Did you really? Because you knew that it was going to be you.
Well, and also I didn't show them any images.
Yeah, it was hard.
So I had to go. It was actually, I had a great time.
You had a great time, but it was,
for cutting it was
because Jill and I would be like, I don't know.
There was nothing. It was sunk to nothing.
Supposed to be, and Darren would be like,
I've definitely worked with directors who are like, hey, they hate group ADR.
I like group ADR. I hate the actor ADR thing because it's such a work. I mean, it's fun. Like working with Jennifer is fun, and certain actors are easy with it. Other actors are tough, but ADR for me is like painful. Group ADR is fun because it's like having fun and it's like acting class for everyone. They get to, try different things. In this film, we didn't put the picture up. So I would just be like, okay, so they're carrying something through the crowd that's like a holy relic.
So think about the interpretation that you're going to do.
And so I would be directing them inch by inch, and then it was up to Jill and Craig to then, create layers because we only had 10 people in the room, and it would be 70, 80, 100 people.
I was about to say, by the time
a lot of work.
A lot more than 10 people in there.
Yeah, no, absolutely, just the layers, and then, and then it wouldn't always fit image-wise what Darren had directed because they're not looking at anything, so the energy wasn't quite right. So then we'd go back and he'd do another session, and that's the great thing about Darren. He's like, okay, we'll go back and we'll get more and we'll do more, and then we got layers, and then Darren would be like, I know I shot this, I know I had this, and then we'd figure that out and pull that over from one thing that we thought it was for over here and bring it in. The great thing about nonlinear editing and editing, mixing, and designing all at the same time is this constant flow of that sort of idea, like stealing something from reel 5 and putting it into 6 because we know it really worked, and it didn't work in 5 but now it works, and so we would do a lot of that, and the fact that he's there is he knows what he shot, and then we didn't use canned stuff.
It's more efficient.
It's more efficient. It just takes it takes a longer time to get it to the level because it needs to be manicured and cultivated and mixed and then redesigned and layered.
But then it has little tidbits in it, things like even when you're doing crowds, you'll have little things that will break through that are just like gems that one person in that crowd of 80, 90, 100 people screams out and it cuts through and it adds something to the film. Yeah. Another thing we didn't talk about was, creating a character of the house, which you had started at the beginning, which was a huge undertaking because we always knew it was something, and we wanted it to be biological. So a lot of sounds came from Jen, were processed into creaks and different types of sounds.
When you say they came from Jen, what do you mean?
We recorded her in all different types of ways. So we recorded her heartbeat, we recorded her breathing, we recorded her crying, and just lowered the lights and just said, try to cry for a few minutes. Really? And then took those sounds and stuck them in different places. They became different types of sounds.
We would dovetail in and out of creaks and actually manipulate her voice in certain ways. There's this little digital stethoscope mic that, Darren used and would literally put her on her chest or on her neck and get different sort of type straining sounds and stuff. And, it's just a nice little thread that if you're listening, you'll catch it. So that's an important thing. We always try to do. But you guys biological stuff.
You played with that a little bit before. When I was listening to Black Swan again, one of the things I noticed was like when she goes to the director to ask for the part, you guys introduce her heartbeat in a way in that scene.
The biology stuff and the breathing and stuff that's born out of, I think it's born out of the main characters a lot in Darren's films. And so we sort of mine that for all it's worth. And I feel as a sound designer, that stuff connects the audience with that person much easier than the coolest sound effect in the world that I could create. Yeah. If you have something that comes from Natalie or Jen and you can manipulate it in a way, it just becomes, it's just specifically for Darren's films, it just connects you, I think, in a better way. And it just,
the audience is not consciously aware of it, but it reinforces this connection between Jennifer and the house.
Yeah.
And
I don't know. Yeah, I think all these little things we do, sure, the audience misses so much of it, but I think, the magic is in the details.
Right.
And it's like every element in Mother is bespoke. We are just, carefully doing the best we can at every moment. And that's the only way I know how to do it, is just keep pushing us to the limit to make every moment interesting to an audience. And you do that by doing things that are going to take you 5 hours and no one's going to pick up on it except for us. And there are millions of those.
But they do. I mean, a lot of people, have seen the movie. A lot of sound people have seen the movie and go, "Wow, you guys have done some really interesting things." And
like within the first 5 minutes, I was like, "Oh, this is going to be it's going to be an interesting track," just because the detail work in the house was so specific and evocative. And of course, I'm listening to it differently than most people, but I'm very aware that there's no music here. I'm not being kind of led through it. But I've also seen your films, and I also know that like this is sort of like they kind of this is a slow burn. They tend to build and become. Like
restraint was a big thing initially. Restraint was a big thing in the first few reels to make it alive, but not tip our hat and make it intriguing. And give that ear candy,
It's very gentle at the beginning,
but it was that slow burn is very, it's very purposeful for sure.
You said something earlier that I wanted to follow up on, which was kind of using dialogue as an element of sound design. And the reason why I was thinking about that was because I went back and I looked at the films again, knowing that we were going to talk. And when I watched The Fountain, there's you guys did something really interesting with the Tree of Life sequences. There's very little ambience work in it. It's really it's the voices, and not a lot of reverb on the voices. They're just very present. And then even in Fountain, there's a wonderful scene when they're in the hospital, and you shot it in extreme close-ups on the two characters, and all the beeping noises from the hospital went away, and it just their voices were very dry. And I'd never really heard people treating dialogue like that before in such a present way. And for me, it had a really interesting kind of psychological effect. It was almost like I felt like I was in their head.
I mean, I don't remember the conversation. I do remember fading out the hospital noises, and that makes total sense to bring the focus in. And we probably played with verb and brought it down to make it more intimate in the way that when you're close to a lover and they're saying a word to you, there's
nothing else in the world. It's just that word.
So it's about using sound in the same way you use every element to tell the story you're telling. And that's a good moment where we basically wanted to show their intimacy, and so we made the sound intimate. And I think that's what we always try to strive for, is like, what's thematically happening here? Because that's, my God is story, and I pray to that. And so I try to serve it in every way I can. And so I ask all the collaborators, DP, sound, music, everyone, this is what's happening here. Bring your craft and do it. And,
Yeah. Do you have a sense of, I think that you use sound in a really interesting way. And so full disclosure, Darren and I have known each other since we were, 1920?
Maybe.
And I remember your short films, Supermarket Sweep, from when we were in college.
We actually co-directed a film.
We co-directed, yes.
Not a film, but a video.
A little video exercise that I think I still have in a VHS tape somewhere.
Blackmail time.
Yeah, exactly. I will never put it on YouTube. But I'm curious about where that awareness of sound as a storytelling tool started to come in from you, because I can guarantee it wasn't like in our college classes when we were doing stuff. But I remember your short films in college, you were already doing stuff that nobody else was doing in terms of camera placement, editing.
it was just a natural feel. I mean, I remember one of the things that got me so juiced about filmmaking, because when I was in college, I did Will Ryman's drawing class. Did you do that class?
I didn't do that one, no.
He was great professor. And, basically he was teaching through the year how to turn a three-dimensional world into a 2D plane, and all different tricks that painters and artists have used that developed technologies, basically, of interpreting what you're seeing and then turning reality into a flat image. And then after that, I tried to get into sculpture and filmmaking.
Right.
And I ended up in filmmaking. Were you in Gazzetti's class, or were you in Moss? Or what
we did. I took Gazzetti.
Gazzetti.
We actually. So I took Gazzetti's class, but then you and I met in second year.
Second year,
which was.
But I was in Gazzetti too. So would you take a year off?
I did take a year
that's
off.
What it was.
Yeah. So, but we did our stuff together in
Miklos Jancsó,
Miklos Jancsó,
who's a great Hungarian filmmaker,
famous Hungarian film director. We took this film class together. He didn't speak any English.
Well, he did, but he said he
understood it.
He had a very, very sexy French translator, which was a little weird.
That's why you took the class?
He taught the class in his broken French, which she then translated into English. It was a very weird year.
But it was good, and it was
great.
More being exposed to his work was interesting.
Of course, seeing those incredible long tracking shots that he used to do. He was an amazing director.
It was something. So in Gazzetti's class, they had that assignment where you had to make a portrait film.
Right.
And that was the first time I started playing with
What was your
music.
portrait film?
I did a little film on this weirdo that I met driving in Latin America, this kind of crazy guy who was into, it's really cool. This one I wouldn't be embarrassed to put on YouTube, but he was like this kind of crazy guy who was into the CIA and into LSD and into Mayan archaeology, and we bumped into him, me, Sean, and Luke, in Palenque. It was like we pulled our car. This is way off, but you'll cut it. But we pulled our car into Palenque, and the car next to us had Massachusetts plates as well. So we waited for this guy to walk out of the jungle, and Jimmy O'Leary came out of the jungle. He was a crazy dude from Boston. He used to smuggle in. He had a pet shop, but he would stuff the snakes filled with cocaine and smuggle them in to Boston, and then slice open these exotic snakes to get the coke out. So anyway, he was a character. So
he became a good friend of yours.
I wouldn't say a friend. He became the subject of my short film. But I remember doing music in that, and I remember this one cut I made where he says something, and I cut to this music moment, and the image changed, and I realized the power of montage. I just had it in front of me, and it was like goosebumps. So I think that's where I had a same experience there, in the basement of Seaver, working on 16. And there can be that magic moment of alchemy that happens when you put the right sound effect or the right music with, and as a filmmaker, it's nothing but compromise. You can never get the shot the way you want. The location didn't come through, the act, but sometimes that magic moment happens and it becomes a movie. Yeah. It's super thrilling. Yeah. We had a bunch of those on this one.
This isn't going to work ever. So
this is so bizarre, but we're going to go for it. So we kept doing that.
Yeah. So Craig, I don't think I'm telling any secrets here by saying that you also work with directors who are not Darren Aronofsky. And you actually won an Emmy for your work on Stranger Things.
I did, yes, just recently. Thank you.
I had no idea. Congratulations, dude.
You. Yeah.
Did you go on stage and everything?
Yeah.
Oh, man. That's awesome.
I got back 3 days before, because I was finishing up the Amos and the deliverables and stuff, and I jumped on a plane on a Wednesday, and then on that Sunday.
By the way, did you make the near field
homecoming.
Mix?
I did it out here.
Okay, cool. I haven't heard it yet.
Told you all about that.
So what I was going to ask you was, how is working with Darren different than other directors?
You could compliment your other directors. I realize
they are.
I like the Duffer Brothers.
A lot of them
you work with
are,
Matt.
A lot of them are disciples of Darren for sure. A lot of them are.
Am I that old?
No.
Freak.
We're getting there, my friend.
You look good though.
Thank you, man.
For an old guy.
Right. What's the question again? No, I mean, every director is different, right? And some directors are every director is obviously visually oriented, and some of them want to dig into the sound and go for it, and other sort of guys hire you because of who you are, and they expect you to sort of do your job. And then in that situation, I try to sort of like bring to the table what I work with Darren, and sort of that aesthetic or that work ethic of actually getting sound in front of someone early and developing those sort of things. So those are the things that I really love about working with Darren, that I try to apply to my other working relationships.
So that actually leads me into, I'm kind of curious, like, how do you guys normally work together? And obviously Mother was kind of an outlier, but are you showing him the scripts before you go shoot?
Yeah, he reads the script as soon as we decide and we get input. He sees an early cut, right? Yep. You see the assemblage.
Yeah.
I mean, often, during production, we'll have Craig send someone up to the set. Cole Anderson actually up to the set.
Oh, Cole.
Yeah.
Cole did it.
Cole still works
another,
in that
well, they were shooting
another old college friend of ours, right?
Yeah.
So they were shooting in Montreal. So Cole being on the East Coast,
He's got his beautiful place up there.
Yeah. But he wasn't that far away. So
he came up on a weekend.
Yeah.
Right, and recorded the house.
He recorded the house. We also did 2 other old Victorian houses as well as initial. Initially when you read a script and I had a couple emails back and forth with Darren, it's like, okay, start collecting sounds, start thinking about things. And so there's like sketchbooks of my stuff at home of just ideas. If I was just thought of something, I was like, oh, I'll write that down, and then Cole and I start this whole early recording system for Darren, and we did it on Noah, and we did a little bit on Black Swan, but definitely Noah, and then definitely took it to the next level on Mother.
Yeah.
So that by the time we got into actual editorial,
you're feeding him elements and you're putting them in your track.
Yeah, no, that happens too with Andy, myself, and
Andy
Darren,
Weisblum,
our the editor. So that's always going on. So generally, nowadays I'm out here for the initial chunk of things when I fly in to New York, and we'll fly in for spotting and then.
Well, we do that. That's a big part of the process. Is we do a big spotting session, which is usually 2-3 days.
And it's usually after I've lived with the movie for a little while. So I'll usually have 4 or 5 weeks on it. I'm already cutting ideas. And then we'll do, at least a 2-day, 2.5 day deep dive.
We go frame by frame, and we talk ideas and scene by scene, and just talk about different ideas, and it just been.
And how much is music a part of that conversation?
Music's usually in the room. Johan was in the room with us.
Johan, and we've done it with Clint too in the past. We've always since the beginning, done that since Requiem. I think we've always been a team. Sound and music is all one
unit,
thing, and so
sounds,
and not using temp
music
music
should flow
either.
between the two, if possible. I mean, we did that most successfully on. The collaboration between Johan and Craig was tremendous. It just didn't see the light of day, but we Requiem and Fountain were deeply intertwined. Yeah.
The scores with Kronos Quartet and
the work with
just with Clint and
and
Clint, Brian, myself.
There was sounds flowing back and forth between everyone. Clint would take a certain sound and use it musically. He would then manipulate certain musical elements. So there was a lot of that. A lot
of discussion, a lot of like how much music here, how much sound design.
And you'd make decisions about what should step forward and what should step back.
Yeah. Between a lot of that happens in the mix also. Everyone comes with a lot to the mix often, and then usually you're carving and seeing what's more important here. In this case, it was just about carving sound design. We didn't have to balance it with anything.
Well, Darren, kind of similar question for you. Why do you keep hiring this guy? What is he? Why is he great at what he does?
He has a natural talent for understanding sounds that make sense. So I look for filmmakers who understand thematically, that understand story, that can see story and then can interpret it in their craft. And it's, sometimes rare to find those people. And when you find them, you hold on to them. So I think he has that ability, and he's an incredibly disciplined and hardworking and organized, which is a decent part of the job, I would say. The scale of the complexity of this. If you looked at his, Pro Tools screen, it's like insanity. It's, like Barack Obama's schedule. You know, it's like, I don't know. That was a weird reference.
That's an interesting way to describe it.
Just like,
I knew, but I
every,
is that a soundbite right there?
But you know, it's just unbelievable richness to what he's doing, and so I just know I'm having someone who's working as hard as I am and thinking about every moment. Those are the people I work with. You know, me and Maddie famously fight everyone on set, and it's only because we're fighting over our crafts, and that's part of it. You want people who are pushing themselves to do the best work they've ever done.
Thank you.
Well, I think that's a great way to end it.
Great.
Darren, Craig, thank you so much for coming and doing the show. It was really fun talking to you today. And congratulations on Mother. The track is amazing.
Thank you very much.